Please welcome our moderator for this panel in response, Clarke Lethin, the Managing Director for the USC Institute for Creative Technologies, and joining him on the panel is Josiah Duhaime, Reconnaissance Training Company, Advanced Infantry Training Battalion, School of Infantry West. Again on the panel, Lieutenant Colonel Donnie Reed, Close Combat Lethality Task Force of the U.S. Pentagon, and Captain Corbin Pearce, Reconnaissance Training Company, Advanced Infantry Training Battalion, School of Infantry West, and our good friend and colleague here at USC as well, Dr. Glenn Fox, head of our Program Design Strategy and Outreach, USC Performance Science Institute. Please welcome them all.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to put a plug in for Leslie and her team, know that the study that she's been conducting and is currently conducting has been pretty much on her back alone. You know, there's no, the funding and donations and things that she has been able to pull together, and a little support from us, has been able to do this very important study. Her and her team, I mean, Brooks living down with Marines for 3 or 4 months. I didn't think he was going to come home, but because we're very good at capturing folks and not letting them go. But I mean, really a call out to Leslie and her team. Important study. You can just see the innovation that she has in thinking about complex problems and what she and her team has done. So, I mean, a round of applause for Leslie and her team for doing this for us. So as some of the folks in the room know, I like to tell stories, so I'd just like to set the stage. The panel before this gave us a great background and understanding of professional athletics and athletes and Olympians. So imagine this, that you have a new game. And your task now, and this is a professional sport or Olympic event, your task is to take your scouts, find your scouts, and go out across America and find individuals, men and women, that want to volunteer to play in this game at a professional level. And they're going to find those folks, and then they're going to bring them in, and you're going to, over the course of a few months to maybe 6 months, you're going to spend time training them, preparing them, getting them indoctrinated or understanding what that sport, what that professional sport Olympic event's going to be. And they're not individuals, although they're part of teams. And those teams may consist of 10 to 13 individuals that are also part of a larger team that could consist of hundreds of individuals, which are part of a larger team that consists of thousands to tens of thousands of individuals. And any weakness or any gaps or any lack of performance in any one of those individuals in that huge team could risk losing the game. And oh, by the way, when you think about that and bringing those people together, I mean, we're talking 6 months they could be in the game. And they're going to join. They're not a team that's practiced together, but potentially they're going to join their team that may be already in the game. And winning and losing is accomplishing the mission, as we term it, and coming back. And coming back in one piece. In sound mind and body. So as you look at professional athletics and the kinds of things that we can learn from professional athletics for this new game that we're going to do, we've got to really think about what are the things, the advantages, as Donnie mentioned, what are the things that we should be doing now to help that. The other story I'd like to tell is, and how we got to this part with the task force that Donnie's involved with. Back in 1985, there was Captain Lethin and Major Mattis. We were the scouts out there looking to fill this team. Fast forward to 2001, September 2001, it was Lieutenant Colonel Lethin and Brigadier General Mattis getting ready to go in the game with no advance notice. 2003, it's Lieutenant Colonel Lethin and then 2-star Major General Mattis. You getting the drift? I'm not advancing, he is. And now we're going into a bigger game. And then in 2006, Lethin finally advanced to colonel, and now we have 3-star Lieutenant General Mattis looking at a much, much bigger game in a more complex environment and thinking strategically of how we're going to prepare and get ready this team that we're putting together, that we're going to send in there. And now we've been in this game for 12 years. Now we've been in this game for 18 years. The game's not going away. So what are we going to do? What's our community going to do? Because, again, the owners of this team are 330 million people. They have a stake in this game. They have the stake of what we're going to do. So we're looking for your support. I tried to outline, and before I ask each of the individuals to kind of give a perspective on their backgrounds, as well as the research and the data that Leslie's involved in, I kind of like to use either hypothesis or theory. So one of the things I kind of wrote down is, can we collect measurable and accurate physiological, biometric, psychological data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, during demanding training and operational events or actions, analyze the data and provide actionable information that will improve physical and cognitive performance, improve personnel selection, and reduce attrition, or keep people healthy. So that's kind of the framework, and my work with Leslie and her team in this study is looking at those kinds of things and seeing how we can do a better job leveraging what this country provides us in the ability to prepare this team for the game that we're going to put them in. So I'd like to have each one of the panel members take a few minutes to kind of share your background perspective, especially as it relates to Leslie's study and what you see and or hope to gain from that. So Josiah, first up.
So, as mentioned, my name is Josiah Duhaime. I am a Fleet Marine Forces Reconnaissance Corpsman. So my role is as the medic within a team. When I go through all the similar schools as the Reconnaissance Marines, and then when should somebody be injured or there's an illness, I'm responsible for addressing that. I'm currently stationed at the Reconnaissance Training Company. I'm an instructor down there, and then I have also been serving as the liaison between RTC and the USC team. So that's kind of been my role. I've worked very closely with Brooks over the last 6 months or so. It's been exciting. It's still a bit fuzzy about where we're going to be able to draw meaningful conclusions with the data that we're seeing and how we'll be able to action that to strengthen our force in the future.
So first off, I'm not a Marine. I do have Army Ranger background, so I'll talk to kind of Ranger, which is very similar. So it is not surprising to me when you put the stats up there and the personality for less anxiety, because just to lay it out there, our training is not really that hard physically, particularly because you have people who are already in the military who are then going through. So there's already been a cut in basic training before they actually go to Ranger training. And there is a standard that you have to meet before you could even go to said training. Really what the training is there to do is to mentally break you. So for individuals that have less anxiety, I would say more people are quitting because they have a self-image of themselves before they go, and when they get there and they're like, this is terrible and I'm not doing well, so I'm going to quit because I shouldn't be with the rest of these guys. Everybody's feeling the same way to an extent, because when you're at the training, it's not making you physically better. I lost 38 pounds in Ranger school, 62 days in a wake up, and my mom walked past me at graduation because I did not look like a Greek god. I looked like I just got out of a prison camp, But to the point, I was mentally hard, because what you learn there is you learn mental resiliency and how hard you can push your body, right? Because I will die before I give up, and that's what you learn there. And why it's important in the military is because when you go on that battlefield, unlike, I'm a Phillies fan, right? So I'm going to use a sports analogy. I think I've seen at least 5 games this year where they brought in the backup second baseman to pitch, right? They're like, we're not doing very well. We'll just sacrifice this one and backup second baseman will pitch. That's not how it works in warfare. Every game is the 4th quarter of the Super Bowl. Either you go and you win or you don't come home, right? So being mentally tough and being prepared to go is how you get to the win, because you have to have that resiliency in order to go, and your training is what gets you there to accomplish that. And last point, it was interesting listening from a sports perspective of all the data that they went through, because we have a similar problem when it comes to operators, because their most important thing to them is they want to stay in the game. Right? There's the fear that if you get all this bio data on me, you're going to want this other guy because his VO2 max and everything else is better. But in the end, hey, man, I got the grit. Like, I will not fail going into the mission. So how do you measure that weird invariable? Because everyone's going to break at a different point. Some people are higher, some people are lower. So you can't just baseline it on biometric feed, because on the battlefield, that may not be enough. Because you may have to push, to accomplish. So we have a saying is like, I cry in training so I can laugh on the battlefield. So training has to be so terrible that when you get to the real thing, we're like, well, that's not even remotely as bad as what we did before coming here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Captain Corbin Pearce. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Saxon and Dr. Fox for the past three years almost, but starting the partnership between USC and Recon Training Company. While I was there, a little background on me, I've been in the Marine Corps for almost 8 years. I'm a reconnaissance officer by trade, and while I was at Reconnaissance Training Company, I was the one responsible for modernizing the training that we're doing there. The training there hasn't changed, and it shouldn't change for almost the past 30 years, but understanding the product that comes out. Again, like Dr. Saxon said, almost 1,000 people go through the training every year, which from an Army perspective isn't that many. But from a Marine Corps perspective, it only produces 250. So the fundamental problem set that we were presented was, how do we increase the number of people that graduate this training without sacrificing the standard? And thus we went into the data set of the holy grail that we were trying to find. How do we measure the things that we can't build, and how do we identify the things that are predictors of success? So on the first point, measure the things you can't build. There are things that you can't change about someone physically. You can't make them taller, shorter, etc., right? There's also things that are more important from their mental state, like you're talking about, sir, you'd rather die before you quit. How do you measure the things that you can't teach a young Marine? Again, the target population, they're a young millennial somewhere between the age of 19 to 22. We have a saying there at school that in one summer they'll become a reconnaissance Marine if they graduate, and also an adult. Like, they've never done either one before. So there's something intrinsically inside of them that's a part of their makeup. We'll help coax it out if some people have it. So that we're trying to measure the unbuildables, the things that we can't create. And then we're also trying to identify what are the predictors of success. Fundamentally, who graduates. So I'm welcome any more questions, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Fox.
Great. Well, thanks. It's such an honor to be on this team and to be on this panel. My career is focused on how we can train the mind. I've spent the last 10 years working with Dr. Sabani, and now the last 4 or 5 years working with Leslie to see how we can really combine this mind and body training to improve outcomes in any population. So I run an institute in the Marshall School of Business where we're taking what we learn from studies like this and democratizing them for people, much like many of you are doing for the technologies you hope that can help improve lives and workplaces overall. So we start with a little analogy, is that if you had to run a marathon in a month, at some point you're probably going to want to practice running to do so, right? Well, if I knew you had some terrible hardship in a month, where would you train your mind to prepare? This question actually draws a blank for many people, and this is the place where we want to play. This is the place where we can learn so much from people like those seated next to me here on the panel, and can tell a story that is almost like a complete vertical from the biology of performance all the way toward mental frameworks. So while we love talking about the psychological performance, what's yet to come and what will be so powerful in these data is the interaction between mind, body, and performance that comes, and then how it feeds back to how we train to improve outcomes. This is just the perfect experiment. For one thing, the classes run 9 times a year, and they're conscribed, and the same thing happens every single time. from a scientific perspective, it's a perfect human laboratory of everything you could want, from driving to striving to frameworks to teaching to coaching to resilience to everything you could want, and it happens repeatedly. The next thing that makes this so powerful is, on a more personal note, the chance as a civilian to work with our armed service personnel has been such an honor, so humbling to see what these teams, these men and women go through every day. It's just in itself inspiring. And we learn so much about leadership, and really, this is going to embarrass them, but so much of the wisdom that they carry about how to lead and how to motivate people maps so well onto what I know from organizational behavior, but also about strategies for emotion regulation, stress, and physiology. So not only are they the laboratory, but they're also the professors and investigators on the front line that are helping inform everything we do. And it's a perfect test case, and it's so important that we do this research because it can translate into high performance in any domain.
Great, thank you. I have some questions for the panel, but really, I mean, I'm looking at time. I'm hoping that from Leslie's study and the information that she's provided and the background of these gentlemen, what they've done, I'd really like to open it up to questions from the audience, because really, you know, I think last time you had a lot of questions. Hopefully, we stimulated some questions from you all and seeing how we can look at this very complex problem and see how, you know, those questions, and see how we can provide some answers. Maybe you can help us with the tasks that we have in preparing this team. So please, I'd like to open it up to the audience. You got a question there, ma'am?
Hi, Dina Lazowski from Biocom. I'm very impressed with this study and the way that you're approaching this. So do you envision screening candidates for this training program differently based on the data that you're seeing?
Go ahead.
So absolutely. I think it's important to stress two things. Number one, we're not trying to exclude people. More than one time, and I could tell you a couple stories, more than one time, we will meet someone that in every aspect on the data, they're not going to make it, they're not going to pass, and they do phenomenally. And they're some of the most famous people in the community, right? But what we're more trying to identify, again, 25% of the people make it, 75% don't. In that 75%, we believe that there are others there that if we could give them the right tools, again, the things that can be built, if we could identify what they need, give them that extra little bit, they could have success. Like the Colonel is saying, like, this is a game, and from our perspective, it's an ancient game that's been going on for a long time. A lot of the rules have been, unfortunately, written in blood. And a young millennial coming to this game doesn't understand and doesn't have the same tools as previous generations. Does that answer your question?
Donnie, I mean, looking from the task force perspective and knowing a little bit about the task force, we're talking about a larger population base. So if you know, are there things the task force is looking at for selection?
So I'll say one of the things that's interesting, and I don't think we have the right amount of data on it yet. So SOCOM ran a study a year or 2 years ago that looked at adrenaline levels on operators in high stress situations, and then how quickly their body recovers post event. And what they found is that it'll spike, and compared to a normal person, it'll spike high and then drop fast when it goes back. Now, so is that the person themselves who's brought to that line of work, and that's what the trend is? Or is it over time their bodies are learning to do that on a quick rate? Because what it does is it drops your anxiety level, right? So you're not as fired up and spun all over the place with a lot of stimuli because you're used to it. So randomly, I was talking to one of our assessment and selection psychs last week. We were talking attributes and everything else, and when I was basically asking her, we got into the biometric portion of the conversation. We're like, well, is there a way we can test to find the right person who's, take this test? These indicators indicate such. And, what she had said, it was rather ironic that if you take the population of SOF and then you compare it to the population of, your normal general population in the U.S., and then the amount of ADHD individuals that are in SOF, it's not even remotely close. There is a ton. Now, and part of that is because the type of person who has ADHD is, a lot of stimuli is all over the place and can't pay attention in the library, but on the battlefield they're calm because there's so much going on, and that's kind of what they end up seeking as employment, because gunfire, explosions, jumping out of an airplane, swimming in the water and then going shooting on land, excites them. And, it puts them in, subconsciously to them, it puts them in a place where they're at ease, right? So they're choosing a line of work that makes them biometrically susceptible to do. So, so to answer your question is like, can we get to the point where we can predict that by giving somebody a test and knowing that, like, you're probably biometrically made up for this line of work, and IQ attribute-wise, here's what your metric of success is, right? So that's kind of where we want to end up getting to, because the better we can filter on the front end is going to identify those individuals that now we can put into the training mechanism, and they're going to be successful. Therefore, we'll have more likelihood of retaining them, rather than constantly just going through the system and changing individuals every 2 years.
Donnie, can I just ask you one question? Because I think one of the things we observed in Mark Green's here, who's a former Navy SEAL, but he explained this to me, and then I realized that we just measured it, is he said, look, and he was an instructor as well, when the most successful guys, everybody goes to a 10. So in our study, everybody has doubts, everybody freaks out. But the guys that come back down to a 4, and I think this is true in elite athletics as well, those are the guys. Like right down to a 4, and they're going. I think we just measured that. So we could, by heart rate, we have a number of physiologic surrogates of that. And if we can match that with the behavior, and then we have this software stack for digital natives where then an instructor doesn't degrade the culture, the training culture, was able to maybe, in some way, we get an intervention where we reach back to that person on the margin, not the guy you don't want, the guy you want. He went to a 4, but he still dropped, whatever the situation was. Can we intervene and get him through? To me, that would be the desired goal, to then understand what the next intervention is. Be able to tell an instructor, okay, this guy, he's a 10 to a 4, he should make it, focus on him. Don't let him drop because his behavior is degrading. Does that sound rational?
I would think so. I would think, but part of the problem is where we're going to have a problem with bigger DoD as opposed to, Recon's a subset of the Marine Corps, so they've already gone through their version of basic training. So you're now getting an individual where you can in-depth screen, and then say he should follow on with this track. How do you do that with bringing people into the Marine Corps? Because like you have a mechanism that they're in to test that and be like, hey, in order to keep him on to go through this, but can you physically do that with a large group? Because you're talking about like hundreds of thousands of people that you're screening now every year, as opposed to the small sample size you're doing in the Marine Corps for Recon. But I know SOF would love that, because any indicator we have of who the right individual is to continue pushing on to put them through, it's only going to benefit us on the back end, because now we're having less drops and you're having the right people stay for retention.
Clarke, my worthless brother has a question.
Ed, how are you?
I'm great, Clarke, and I'm the worthless brother. I'm an advisor to the center as well. I'm totally fascinated. I'm a storyteller, I'm a filmmaker, and totally fascinated by this idea that, even from a story perspective, that grit may be less important than optimism. I think when you see the commercials and when you even see the training films, you think, well, this is all about grit. This is about, are you tough enough to be a Marine? Marine and tough are almost synonymous in people's heads, and yet the early psychological, for Mona and Glenn, the early psychological stuff would indicate that optimism is important. I don't think, oh, you know what, I'll go into the Marines to learn optimism. And yet that could be an important part of the training. So I'm really interested as to whether this specific kind of psychological correlation between optimism versus grit reflects anything that you guys have found in other psychological studies, and whether that might be learned and be part of, if you will, the retraining, rebranding, whatever it is. You want to be happy, go in the Marines, as opposed to you want to be tough, go in the Marines.
Well, the main thing, and the main thing is that most people's conception of what optimism is completely inaccurate. Optimism is not a fuzzy word for happiness. Optimism isn't a fuzzy way of saying everything's great when it's not great. Optimism, if you study the way optimists look at the world, it's a fundamental disposition toward using the tools in your pocket to make a better outcome in the future. That's it. The key trait of optimists is they believe they can take a bad thing and it will stay bad, but they can work with it. That's why optimistic people pay attention to their doctors better. Optimistic people may actually be faster to quit an unsolvable problem. Optimism is fundamentally a process of seeing the world more clearly and seeing what can be controlled. Grit is not my favorite construct between all of us here. But optimism is not, the key thing is to focus on what optimism actually is, and that's what we're seeing. And that's what, when you talk to Corbin, when you talk to Josiah, you talk to the people, they're the ones who are saying like, wow, my knee really hurts, but I can work with it. I'll make it happen. It's not my knee hurts and I'm gonna deny that it hurts. It's that it's a fundamental disposition that you can work with a hurt knee. And you can see how that can be trained. There are dozens of studies showing that we can increase optimism using some structured format and training. And that's what we intend to do here once we have a better model of how to filter and how to understand all the variables at play.
So this hasn't been proven through the data yet, but it's one of the strong hypotheses that we've talked and discussed over time, especially Josiah and I'm pleased to add to this, is that it's more important the filter that you're looking, or the lens you're looking through the world through, than necessarily, as long as you have the baseline capabilities, cognitive, physical, you'll be fine. It's how you're looking at the world is the most critical junction of what we're trying to find out.
So we have a question here in the middle of the room. Ed, would you please pass your, ladies and gentlemen, the Worthless Brother is the Academy Award winning for Silence of the Lambs,
bring a microphone.
current producer of Showtime's Ray Donovan, right in front of you, Ed, who still has not hired me. Let's have a hand for Ed Saxon.
Dr. Hill.
Partner in crime. So my question is, are you thinking about something we were talking about in that earlier panel about longevity? Mm-hmm. How does this predict how you're going to respond to the stresses and the trauma over time? Are you going to see any connection to the things that you're discovering here to proclivity to post-traumatic stress? I'm just curious whether you've thought about that.
So I think it's still a bit early to draw some of those correlations between the health of a service member over long term, seeing as we've only assessed the data from one class. Ideally, as this continues, we'll be able to create models and adopt them to where we can track, using current technology, the health of service members throughout their career. We're able to show when they go on deployments, their physical status before then, their injuries, how quickly they heal over time, and so that we can create more personal health care throughout it instead of having the more blanketed aspect of health care that we currently have within the military. So ideally, we'll be able to mold this into that, but it's still a bit early to tell.
So we have a question back here in the corner.
Thank you. So two-part question. So first off, sometimes there are physical conditions like hypothermia, for example, that can have a severe impact on your mental state. Now, I haven't experienced combat, but I've done offshore ocean racing, which is somewhat extreme. And so a question that I have about the quantified self in general, especially on the military side, is have you looked at tools to help a soldier recognize when their mental state is being compromised, even though they may not be aware of it, and then to maybe help them manage their, I will not quit situation, so that they can actually succeed in the mission, maybe by throttling back a touch or changing things up a little bit. So that's part one. And then part two is, are there any insights that you can share with us about how your lessons from this research can be applied to the civilian world, where there are other sort of life and death situations, surgeons, airline pilots, bus drivers? So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I'm going to need some help from my fellow panel members on this. On the first question, the training is done like many other similar programs throughout the DoD. There was a period of which we were doing a lot of assessment on individuals. in the second phase of training, when Dr. Saxon showed the BRC phase, one of the things we do is we do what I call like an interactive counseling session, but it's not the way that you think of it from an academic point of view. One of the important parts about being a reconnaissance Marine is understanding when your oxygen content in your brain, when you're in the water, is getting too low that you're not making cognitively logical decisions, right? So we run through drills of which you go down and up and down in the water column, touch the bottom of the pool, come back up, touch the bottom of the pool, come back up. And you get to the point where you recognize that I'm starting to become hypoxic, and the instructor talks you through what this means. We do the same thing when it goes through hypothermia down in Coronado. So it's something that is very much learned almost in less of a science and more of an art. There's somebody that's a woodworker teaching someone else how to woodwork. And that kind of leads into the second question. I think there's a perception in general media that to do a hard thing is to do something for a short period of time, and it's really difficult to move a great weight, to do a great effort, right? But to Donnie's point, a harder thing is to do something annoying for a time that you cannot escape, to do something for a long period of time and choose not to leave, to choose to stay. The definition of not to quit is to stay. So to build resiliency across any sector of any type of job is to teach people how to stay. Does that answer your question?
Hey, if I could add on to that real quick. So we call it the 4 horsemen of training, right? If you're cold, wet, tired, and hungry, that's what breaks people. And what the beauty is of the military is that we get to experience all 4 at the same time, right? Because we only have X amount of time to put you through training, so we're just going to pile all 4 on you, and it's going to be terrible, and you get to experience all 4. Now, what is good and what you do learn is that each individual experiences the 4 differently, and, you know, some people will be like, not having food doesn't really bother me that much, but I can't go without sleep because I know I'm terrible. When I'm going to react like X, right? So what you learn is how you're going to respond when you're giving that or stimulus or lack of what is normal, comfortable life. So, you know, the military way of how you're going to experience stuff like, you know, hypoxia is we'll throw you into the chamber and you will go up to 25,000 feet. And beforehand, they'll give you a class and be like, here's the 10 signs of hypoxia. Each person's going to experience them differently. And then you get thrown out into the chamber, and you go up like, man, my skin is tingly, and I feel like I'm drunk, so that they're my signs, right? So you get to experience them, so you know when you go through, you're going to have that effect. So there are efforts looking at sensors and everything else that, you know, will give you a readout, kind of like a dive computer for people who do scuba diving. It will tell you, hey, you know, this is where you're at, and this is what your measures are. But in the end, I'm going to just straight be honest with you. The way operators roll, I'm like, I don't care what the computer says. I know what I can do to get to X, and if I got sent out here, it's not like I can make a timeout. We can go back. I'm going to push until we win, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's where I'm trying to go. And if I could just, like, to answer the last 2 questions real quick. So optimism and why it's important, particularly given what you looked at with Marine Recon screening, is it's basically a group school, right? And optimism is it goes through the group when it happens. So I'll give you a quick war story. So I was in SEER school. I've been in SEER school, survival, escape. You know, I'm in a prison camp, and I'm the senior ranking officer, right? So I'm in front of the formation, and somebody hits me rather hard across the face, and you know I go down limp, and we get thrown in a room afterwards, and then you know everybody's kind of quiet, like, this is terrible. We're never going to get out of here. And somebody comes up and is like, hey man, you okay? You got hit pretty hard. I'm like, I think I just broke his hand with my face. So if we go back out there, I'm going to see if I can break his other fan. And everyone laughs. And then we go back out and like, you know what? Hey, man, they can take whatever they want from us, but they can't take time. That clock is still ticking, and this will end eventually. And you go up, and that optimism spreads. And it's not as bad as we thought a minute ago because we're together. So where I'd be interested in where grit plays into it is if you're looking at something that's like an individual event where there's nobody else to draw off their optimism. And no matter how optimistic you are, situations get bad. And you're going to break. And if I have no one else to pull optimism off, and it's just me and my grit, that's a different story than if, like, you know, I'm going to drive, but he's driving too.
Okay. The silent voice of Troy has given me the indication that we're about done. Again, thanks to Dr. Saxon. I mean, there's some interesting data that's coming out of this, and it's still collecting that data. Kind of surprised, optimism versus grit, because there is a community and a push that, grit is the only thing. I think this data could begin to challenge some of those assumptions, which is what we constantly need to be doing here. Again, for everybody, you come from different aspects and different perspectives and different communities. We're asking for your help, asking to help inform us, educate us, because we're always innovating. Contrary to popular belief, we have to constantly be changing the way we conduct business, the way we play this game, and we need everybody's assistance in helping us be able to better prepare our team for the game they're going to be playing in.
Before these good people leave the stage, and before I make my announcement about lunch, the USC Center for Robotic Computing and the entire University of Southern California is always honored by the presence and service of those serving America through our military. For everyone here who has ever served in the military, and for those who are with us currently serving in the military, let us join together and give a profound word of thanks by clapping our hands and saying thank you for what you do for America.